Hello, welcome to Pride, Not Prejudice. Not what James Barr thought it was, which is Pride and Prejudice, the Jane Austen novel. I had to actually talk him around to that. You're watching live on metro.co.uk, it's on their Facebook Live. Please tweet, #StudentPride, @StudentPride. This panel is presented by me, Cliff Janouu, Editor-in-Chief of Attitude Magazine, so you can include us as well at Attitude Mag as well, and any of our wonderful panelists who I'll quickly introduce, although their identities will flash up on screen. We've got BBC News LGBT correspondent Ben Hunte. Munroe Bergdorf needs no introduction.
Hi.
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 Model Reece King. Shahmir, Sanni. And UK Black Pride's Moud, Goba.
Hi.
Thanks to everyone for joining us. I'm just going to begin by talking about an article that I published on attitude.co.uk this week, which was addressing the issue about how we need to talk about racism in the LGBT community. It was kind of hinged around the uproar around the Manchester Pride flag, which, to cut a very long story short, Manchester Pride, as a campaigning organisation, decided to include the black and brown stripes to highlight the issues faced by BAME people who kind of have been left behind or forgotten a lot in the struggles that we're fighting for as a community. There was a huge uproar, which was quite disheartening to see. If you look at some of the comments from the article that I wrote and against Manchester Pride when they announced it last month, it was quite disturbing actually to see just how many people were vehemently against this idea that we need to highlight issues around racism. And it's very sad for me to say that a lot of these comments were coming from white gay men. There was a particular Facebook message that came up, actually, which I'll read to you now. I won't say who it came from. Can you imagine? Basically, he says, I stopped reading after the first sentence. White people don't like to talk about racism. Yes, we do. It's uncomfortable to address because it reminds us about our privilege. No, it doesn't. I think most of us have faced many battles in life. Besides, it goes much deeper in society than just the color of someone's skin. Why not bring up class and accents, the color of your hair, being judged on looks, the size of arms, height, age, issues, sexuality? He goes on. It has nothing to do with race, so stop including it in the same card. The flag was always inclusive. Essentially, what he's saying there is that he doesn't want to read the article because it makes him feel uncomfortable. And he just, in those comments, he's erasing the black and Asian and minority ethnic experience. It's something that you've recently discovered. Like, this was your first week on the job with the BBC News.
Well, next week is my first week
okay,
as the BBC's LGBT correspondent. In fact, the week after, from March.
Okay.
So I'll be the BBC's LGBT correspondent. Thank you. I'm really excited for it, but I have to say, over the past year, I've been a presenter for BBC Africa. And it's kind of been a lot like Wakanda Forever, because I've been surrounded by black individuals, black excellence, people from the African continent doing incredible things. So I wanted to see what my first piece would be like as the LGBT correspondent, so I put it out this week. It was about LGBT history. And it looked at the fact that we don't actually appreciate some of the heroes that came before us and have represented us and done incredible things. So I went down to Brighton and spoke to people, and none of them knew the 6 heroes that we'd chosen who had contributed to LGBT history. So that piece went out on Monday across the BBC, TV, World News, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. And in all honesty, I have never received so much abuse in my life, even as being an LGBT YouTuber. But I suppose the difficulty with that was that I knew it was going to be bad, but I didn't realize it was going to be that bad.
What scared you most, or what surprised you the most?
What surprised me most was the lengths that people would go to find me. So I was having emails to my BBC email address. I had one email that said, since when did the BBC allow Negroes to present the news? I had things, I mean, if you can, it's still up, so you can actually go to these pages and see. And I had internal conversations with the BBC about what we're going to do, because that story was just a fun and friendly piece about LGBT history. When I'm digging deeper and I'm putting vulnerable people on the news, what are those comment sections going to look like?
Yeah.
Because we're all strong people sat up here, and I'm sure you're all strong people in the audience, but there are people who cannot come out in support of their own sexuality. They cannot come out in support of their gender. So when they're looking at these comments on BBC platforms or on social media, what does that look like? And just before I finish, I will say as well that there were comments within the community. So I had messages from gay white men who said, what gives you the right as a straight man to tell the gay experience? And it's like, boo, I'm gay. But they had seen this video online, seen me as a quite masculine-looking, I guess, black man, and assumed that I was straight.
They assume that you could actually be a gay man and a black man.
But the lengths that you would go to not even Google me, to like see my YouTube channel and all of that, but just to actually at me and say, you're a straight man, how dare you tell my story?
It's a lot of the reactions I had on the article, which ran this week. It's, they didn't even read the copy.
Oh, no.
Like, they don't even look into the story or the history. They just want to attack and go for you. I mean,
you know
must
what?
have experienced plenty of that, Munroe, in your time.
Oh, God, yeah, welcome to my world.
That's it. It's good to be here.
Yeah, oh, wow. That is the problem. It's as soon as you say the word racism, people, it's like a red veil goes over people's faces and they just get angry. And it's, I think the problem is that a lot of people, especially white people, don't understand what racism actually is. And as soon as you say the word racism, people think, you know, throwing things, lynching people, you know, sorry, trigger warnings. I'm going to talk about violence and just, you know, really explicit physical violence and verbal violence. That's what people think of when we say racism. But racism is extremely nuanced. It's extremely covert sometimes. And just really breaking down, you know, unconscious bias, everything to do with the insidious nature of racism within our country. People don't want to hear it. So it's almost like we don't even get a chance to explain.
Why do you think they don't want to hear it?
Because I think people feel that it's their fault and they don't want to be, they don't want to take responsibility, and they shouldn't have to take responsibility, really, because the nature of this country and the West largely is built on racism. So it's almost like you're opening, it's like the Matrix. You tell someone that they're living in the Matrix and they don't want to believe it, and then they just like, their whole mind explodes because they're like, oh my God, who am I? What have I been doing? I feel guilty. It's almost like you're showing someone, you're opening the world up to somebody, and they either have, you know, a chance to take the blue pill and like find out the truth, or the red pill and live in ignorance, and they choose the red pill.
There's a word, obviously, that gets used a lot, and that's privilege. And what I learned for the first time this week when I put that article up was how people, they get so angry when you use that word.
Yeah,
I'd never seen that before, that kind of reaction to it. It's become such a loaded term now, and it's a huge trigger for people.
Yeah, well, it's difficult because if someone has had a hard life and then you tell them that they're privileged, I can see how that would be hard for them. But if you then say, oh, you've had a hard life, but then imagine if you were black also. Imagine if you had racism to deal with also. And then they were just like, well, I think, and you can see how they're processing that in their head, because they know what it means in their head to be seen as black or brown or Asian.
It's quite scary to think that, you know, just because we are LGBT+, doesn't mean there are no racists in our community. Because you kind of think we're such a loving community, we look after each other, we've all been ostracized in one way or another, some more than others. But it exists, doesn't it, Moud?
There is a lot of racism in our community. I think, speaking from Ben's experience, I experienced a lot of racism. I'm a black African woman from Zimbabwe and a refugee, and Channel 4 did a program on refugees, LGBT refugees. The amount of racism I got on that page was mostly from gay white men, because, you know, they were like, but you have children, how can you be less, you know, you have children? You know, it was sort of ridiculous comments, and it was harsh, and it was a sort of reality, and this happens every day to other black people who are, like I said, asylum seekers and refugees, or black LGBT people who go into spaces and they're turned away because they don't look gay, or they're just told you can't come in, and you know it is because of their race. So it's absolutely, draining to the soul.
Of course, one of the things we discuss a lot about is identity. No matter what ethnic background you are from, everyone has their way that they identify, and obviously when you're BAME, you identify with different ways. There are intersectionalities of when your Black or Asian identity mixes with your white, your sexuality or your gender identity. So, I mean, that's, Shahmir, I mean, you've probably most publicly had to forfeit part of your identity or kind of had it publicized when you were outed essentially in the media. Do you want to quickly run the audience through for anybody that doesn't know exactly what happened?
Very briefly, so the government of the United Kingdom released press statements when I came forwards about criminal activity during the Brexit referendum, and they blamed it on me being bitter about my ex, because one of the 10 people that I named was a former partner. And so obviously I wasn't out. And so in effect, it became the first time a government has outed someone for being gay in the world. So I think my experience is quite telling of the more macro beliefs of Britain and the West, particularly when it comes to the way your sexuality as a white person is considered almost sacred. But when it comes to the sexuality or identities of people of color, aside from their race, it's not seen as something that is valued. It's not respected. And that obviously is rooted in this idea of white supremacy. And I've never understood this idea that white LGBTQ people, or that the LGBTQ community can't be racist because it was gay white men that outed me. It was gay white men that went on Twitter and said, oh, he was already out. Oh, he's just dramatizing the fact that he's Pakistani, who attacked my identity. And so I think there's a huge cognitive dissonance among the LGBT community as a whole. I think particularly when it comes to the issues facing people of color. Like, for example, and I will name them, when you have a prime minister out a Pakistani Muslim man, knowing full well of the implications, and you have news publications and activists forgiving Theresa May for her, one, homophobic past, and two, for the actions that she committed against a brown body. I think there are serious changes need to happen within the LGBT community, particularly when it comes to racism, and that starts with addressing our own imperfections.
One of the worst comments I've seen on Facebook is when you bring up racism and they're like, oh, here we go again. Do you ever, I mean, how do you react to a comment like that? Go ahead.
Well, I actually came off Facebook.
Yeah.
After I've had a few public issues with racism, but I actually came off Facebook because I don't believe that it's a great way of pushing forward when it comes to discussing issues. I feel like it is a very echo chamber mentality, and it doesn't really go anywhere, and it just stresses everybody out, apart from the people that are privileged enough to go out and walk their dog after having a conversation. That's the truth, unfortunately. But I think we just need to think about the mediums that we're discussing racism on and how we can reach the furthest people possible, because the people that we need to speak to need to really understand the humanity behind the word racism, They need to understand our experiences and the truth of being exposed to racism every single day in all of its entities.
Talking about experiences, I mean, there are often conflicts in our intersectionalities and our different identities. Like Reece, yourself, your parents are Irish and Black, yeah. Caribbean, and you grew up in Essex. Yeah. Like, where did you find conflicts in those different identities for yourself?
I found them, well, at first I probably wasn't aware of it. I think I was probably guarded and protected from situations that I didn't know were going to happen yet. But probably around primary school sort of time is when I realized other people were more interested in what makes me me than I was more aware of. I think I hided who I was for a long time, so I didn't know who I was. And I wouldn't realize until someone would come at me with a really rude, old-fashioned stereotype or something insulting. So I don't think I realized until I started to become more comfortable with myself, how much conflict other people put onto me through just not knowing who you are yet. So I would say around primary school is when I became more aware of the ideas other people think that they don't say. Yeah.
So it's the unsaid things that actually were more prominent than what was necessarily said.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you've had obviously conflicts with your intersectionalities. How does that affect you on a personal level? I mean, for a long time you hid being gay, Muslim, and in professional capacity.
Yeah, I think any Muslim, I think the sort of experiences of Muslim LGBTQ people are a whole different kettle of fish. That's a whole different panel. But I think it comes from self-education. Most of my life, I grew up in Pakistan, and so I know I had friends of friends who had been sodomized. I know my friend's brother was, murdered by his uncle. Those are the experiences that I have of what being LGBTQ is. And so I think there's so much nuance to being Muslim and gay, and I think anyone who has sort of intersecting identities that sort of mix your sexuality and your cultural or religious background would understand. But I think, I don't know, it's a big conversation. When it comes to me accepting myself as a Muslim gay man, it came from education. I educated myself on Islam. I tried to understand. I read the Quran again. I sort of kept telling myself, I'm going to go to hell, so I might as well learn. And I think through that self-education, I really did become closer to God, ironically, and I've found myself to be prouder of my sexuality because I was Muslim. And I think that you can translate that to most religions. It just comes down to a really strong education of your own religion, and then acceptance of your identity within that religion. I think rejection of, if you're from a very religious background, whether you're Muslim or Christian or Jewish or Hindu or Sikh or Zoroastrian, this immediate rejection of your religion causes a lot of trauma. I think it causes anxiety, depression, PTSD. It can cause an array of different problems for your mental health. So I think it's about realigning the conversation when it comes to people growing up in religious communities to actually not saying reject it, but understand it and then choose to leave.
Have you ever made you feel lesser because of your ethnic background when amongst other gay people?
I wasn't ever. Lesser is a. I wouldn't use lesser, but I would be judged, particularly within the Westminster and the political establishment. When I would talk about Pakistan, they would be like, but they hate you, but you can't be proud to be in Pakistani or Muslim and be gay. In fact, I'd be laughed at. A lot of white gay men don't understand the nuances. A lot of white people do not understand the nuances of having intersecting identities and cultural identities. It's sort of seen, you either accept this or reject this, but there's a nuance to it. And I think the lack of understanding that nuance is what has led to this point where...
I find it hard to accept that you can be both and accept both parts of your identity.
Absolutely.
You're not in there, Lord. You can't.
Yeah.
I think apart from being, it's not lesser per se, but you can be invisible. As a black lesbian woman, you can be completely invisible. And I know this is true of many other communities. There is so much difference in our community. We are so different, so much that other communities are completely ignored or they are made to feel invisible. So I would go back to intersectional challenges, how I found that I could cope with my intersectionality or my challenges, my different identities, was finding networks that were finding people like me, finding people who accepted me, finding a space and finding a voice. Because often you don't get to, you go to panels, I think maybe it's changing now depending on where you are, but sometimes you go to panels, you don't see a woman there, you don't see a minority there, you don't see a trans person there, but there will be trans issues, women issues, and different issues being talked about. And you think, where are these people? Could you not have reached out to those people? But it's being given a voice or finding my space that has allowed me to sort of deal with my different challenges. But definitely maybe not less about there's sort of making people invisible in our community. Maybe because we don't want to deal with racism, or people are uncomfortable talking about racism, but we need to be uncomfortable to make things work. We need to be uncomfortable to forge ahead. If we don't talk about it, then we're going to have these issues going on and we keep going backwards. So we need to be uncomfortable. So it doesn't matter if there's a whole big Twitter fight or whatever, but people need to feel uncomfortable, because at the end of the day, you give them something to think about. You give them something to talk about. When I got a lot of abuse and comments from Facebook on a Channel 4 site, I went away because my friend said, it's like talking to the wind, just ignore them. Those gay men don't understand. But I thought, no. I went and I replied to each and every comment, which was a lot. I was really angry typing, but I replied to everybody. And when they replied, I replied back. It was like a whole war for 2 days. And then in the end, I actually found that some of them were like, okay, maybe I was wrong about this. Let me just think about this. So I got some responses in inbox. But to me, it was like, okay, at least you went away to think about it. You might be still racist and a really horrible person, but you're thinking about it.
But there's something to be said about being able to have an honest conversation about racism, because a lot of people are very scared to voice their thoughts because they don't want to be misheard or misunderstood. But then on the other side of it, there is a lack of honest and open discussion in terms of, some people just are aggressive and attacking. Like I went to a panel discussion a couple of weeks ago, and Sadie Sinner from the Cocoa Butter Club, she said something marvelous actually. She said, we haven't found our comfort in discomfort. We haven't learned how to be uncomfortable talking about these things honestly and openly, so therefore we can't talk about them honestly and openly, because when you do bring them up, you get attacked by that. I mean, that's obviously, again, something you must relate to, Munroe.
Sure, and I think the reason why we are so uncomfortable, why so many people are uncomfortable about speaking about race, is because we don't speak about race, and we aren't raised to speak about race. We aren't raised in schools with Black, brown, Asian role models and our contributions to this country, which I believe creates this idea that ethnic minorities are guests within this country, that this isn't something that our ancestors have built, that we have just miraculously appeared and we are demanding to change a country that we have no right to be asking to change, which is obviously rubbish. But I believe that this is the case, especially when I'm speaking about racism, or we're all speaking about racism, and a lot of the responses are, well, if you don't like it, go back to your own country, or go back to where you came from. And the reality is, I've been to Africa once, and I'm from Jamaica. So it's difficult, but I think the more that we're teaching the younger generations about the contributions of ethnic minorities to this country, and the fact that this country is 87% white, but there have been significant contributions to this country from people that have been extremely marginalized. And I think once you do that, you humanize the Black and the brown and the Asian experience and people, and show that we can be aspirational role models. We can be, we can contribute in exactly the same way as everybody else.
One of the things I wanted to talk about is racism within the communities. Do you feel like we talk about racism within BAME communities enough?
Perhaps not, but as you said, it's a dialogue that needs to be continual. We need to start and we need to continue talking about it. So perhaps we don't talk about it enough, but we need to start. We need to keep on moving with it.
There was a comment on the article that ran, somebody said, oh, where is the light orange stripe for Asians and East Asian people when it came to the Manchester flag? So again, it's very hard to represent everybody at once and speak for everybody when there's so many people in our community.
I don't think it's hard to, you can't speak for everybody, but you can support people in giving them a voice. So I don't see a problem in adding another color to the flag. We have space. Why couldn't we do that? But it is sort of listening to what people are saying, and in people who are working in different organizations, it's like doing meaningful outreach. You can't just outreach to people and it's like pride time and you want to ensure that there is enough color, but it's doing a lot of work and outreach into different communities, outreach into marginalized communities, in different spaces. So if you do a lot of engagement, community engagement, people will reach out if they feel that you have good intentions.
In terms of UK Black Pride, actually, again, one of the really scary comments I see a lot is like, why do they need UK Black Pride? Like, what do they need UK Black Pride? It kind of, that's the answer there as well. Like, how do you react to that?
The reaction is always, if we lived in an ideal world, we wouldn't need pride at all, to start with. And if we lived in an ideal world, we wouldn't need UK Black Pride. There are still a lot of communities who are marginalized, and there is space for everyone at UK Black Pride. People always kind of have this misconception that UK Black Pride is just for Black people. UK Black Pride is for everyone. It is a space where people are free and feel safe and are welcome.
I mean, I don't know, how many people in the audience have been to UK Black Pride? Just out of curiosity.
Whoop, whoop.
Few.
Yay. You count, you're in the audience. It's one of the most wonderful days. It's just so full of love and like warmth. And it feels like Pride, the first Pride I went to in the 90s, showing my age.
I feel like it's the roots of Pride. And can we get a round of applause for Lady Phil? Like, Lady Phil is a goddess, and what she's done with bringing UK Black Pride to London really has reimagined what Pride should be in like 2019 especially, and the inclusion, the political aspect, the intersectionality, the reminders of where we need to go, where we've been, to love each other, and to take away the commercialization of Pride especially, and what you're left with when you take away that commercial aspect. Is it still political? Is it still reminding us of why we need Pride in the first place? And I don't necessarily believe that regular Pride does all the time, not all the time, and I believe that UK Black Pride is that necessary entity.
In terms of Pride, you're gearing up to do a lot of them with the new job.
Yeah.
The Manchester Pride fiasco, when they announced that, how did you feel, and what did you think about the comments that were coming out of it?
I was shocked, but then, to be honest, I've been an LGBT YouTuber, and on that platform, I was one of very few Black men within the UK that were speaking about a gay experience, or an LGBT experience. So I was aware of the kind of attitudes that existed within the community. That didn't shock me. What did shock me was the media backlash. So the idea that certain media platforms were running stories around it in a very one-sided way. I don't feel like there was balance within it. But I wasn't surprised. I really wasn't. And to me, it wasn't such a huge thing. I need to stay impartial because it's the BBC. But I do think that there was more room for a bigger conversation around it. And I think it was very one-sided the way that the media portrayed it.
Is it hard for you to stay impartial? Like, how do you negotiate that?
Good questions. So I think it is difficult to stay impartial on an issue like this as well.
Because it's personal. It's about your identity. You're not reporting on the politics in, there's some country far away that is at war or something. This means something to your person.
Yeah, I mean, it is personal, it's very personal, and I think that's why there's a bigger conversation to be had with the BBC around what does my role look like. And I think when I do actually come into the role in March, I am going to be forming it myself. I'm going to be kind of like shaping it around what I think the community needs. And I mean, my ultimate ambition for it is to put the mouthpiece to the people that need to speak the loudest. And at the moment, I think that is the marginalized communities within the LGBT community as a whole. So I don't necessarily need to be the person that's standing there like championing everybody, but I will let people speak. And if there's one thing that I'd actually point out to everybody, it's just knowing your worth. And if you know your worth, if you understand that you have had an incredible journey and you are worth being where you are, and it's about sharing that story. I think within panels like this, I think within organizations like Pride and things like that, there are still people that want to be there that are not there. And it really is about knowing your worth, standing up and sharing that story. And if you want to share that with the BBC, then obviously I'm here. So,
Or attitude.
or attitude. That's it.
Going to
Get
fight for your
promo.
stories now.
Can I just add?
Yes, of course.
And in my working in politics and seeing the way that British politics works, and I have learned a lot about the way the British public work. And within the LGBT community, in my personal opinion, and I think most would agree, the LGBT community's focus, particularly with institutions such as publications or events like Pride, have become so focused on impartiality and have become so focused on, like you said, on forgetting that being LGBTQ is political. Our identities are political. So if you say, oh no, we can't talk about this because it's like too controversial, then you're not being LGBT, you can't be part of the community. How can you say you're part of the LGBT community or working for the community when you're impartial? Like, for example, if you're Pink News and putting Theresa May a month after she is outed a gay Pakistani man, how is that working for the community? And I will say this, if you're Peter Thatchell and forgiving Theresa May for her actions, her homophobic actions, or for outing a Muslim man for the whole of the community, how is that benefiting the community? This focus on impartiality, this focus on not being political is what has driven the LGBTQ community and the people of color within the LGBT community to the ground. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired. I'm so tired.
I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that. We're not impartial when it comes to misogyny. We're not impartial when it comes to homophobia against white gay men.
Yeah.
But there seems to be a real lapse in judgment when it comes to the oppression of black and brown and Asian bodies. There really does. And, and transphobia as well. It's almost like at this moment in time in the British press, transphobia is seen as an opinion. And transphobia can never be seen as an opinion. It's wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the fact that we're giving platforms to known transphobic women, especially transphobic exclusional radical feminists, or I like to call them transphobes, the fact that we're giving them platforms and allowing them to spread this hate. You can have an opinion and you can have free speech, yes, but then if you abuse your freedom of speech
Disowning people's right to their identity.
I feel that we really, and as the old saying goes, if you're impartial in instances of oppression, then you side with the oppressor. So if you're not passing an opinion, and sorry, this is not shade at you, babe. I know it goes down to systems. It's systemic racism. It stops people from being able to speak up. So if you're not speaking up, the shade. If you're not speaking up, then it's contributing. It's just putting the power into the hands of the oppressor anyway.
Can I say something on that? Can I just say something on that? I think it's important to remember that, especially with my role coming in, I am going to be the LGBT correspondent, so I'm here to tell our stories.
No, I was not talking about you. It was shade to the BBC.
But I think what I think is important is that with my role especially, I'm digging deeper into the issues that we have within our community. I don't need to sit here to fight for, to put people on a platform to argue whether people exist. It's not about arguing for existence. We exist, we're here. But I think what is missing within LGBT media, no shade to attitude, but I think what is missing is almost the digging deeper within our issues within our community. This is an incredible conversation. It's the first time I've kind of been involved in something like this. But even hearing those different opinions, I'm like, wow. There's so much more to learn. And I think within my role, that's what I'm looking to do, is to literally put the mouthpiece to people who may not be having those conversations already and getting their voice spread wider.
There was, you mentioned about our bodies and us being able to own them, and one of the two reactions I'll read out quickly from that I've seen on social media this week is, one person said, I want to read more comments from posts related to racism, blah, blah, blah. Whereas it's, stop mucking about with the flag. I'm not racist. I happen to prefer dating some races more than others. And somebody else said, that's a tough subject. Some people aren't sexually attracted to people of a different color, but could be great friends. Lovely. You know, my response was like, I wasn't talking about sex, I was talking about racism. How do you negotiate people? I mean, have you felt like you've been objectified because of your race within the gay community by the gay men?
Yes.
You know, this, so please share.
I think with my job as a model, it ties in with it perfectly because quite a lot of the times I could get fetishized if I'm not wearing any clothes, like regardless of what color I am, because I'm a model, sometimes the situation, it leads to that anyway. But sometimes it feels like that's what fuels the fire, specifically because of how I look or my race. It's like that's the character we're going to build around just the color of your skin. So if you don't, sometimes, you know, they don't even want to know your personality and you'll just be the mannequin. So you can be fetishized like that anyway. I'm sorry if I say I have elastic bands in my mouth. Yeah, so you could get fetishized anyway, but it definitely is a huge part. I've felt it, the disconnect from people. Sometimes I've learned, like I think I've learned now how to realize who's talking to me and who's actually just saying what needs to be said to lead to something else that benefits them.
One of the, I mean, we need to wrap up now, but one of the things I want to get from everybody on the panel quickly, we've got like 3 minutes, so keep it succinct. How will we know when things are getting better? Like, what are the one things that we can do now to like move the conversation forward? Because it's not like we're championing for, you know, equal marriage. This is, we're trying to change social issues and like the minds of people out there and move it forward. So just maybe we start with Maud and we move down quickly. What can we do?
What we do, I think, as said before, we need to get uncomfortable. We need to talk about it. Don't be shy to challenge any ignorance. And we need to be inclusive in all its words, not to just use it, but we need to be inclusive. We need to ensure that everybody's at the table. If you're somewhere, you need to ensure that everyone is represented. Leave no one behind. I know that at the moment it feels like everything is fine. We've got equality. People can get married. But equality is not leaving anyone behind. And if we still have to deal with racism, if we still have to deal with transphobia, if we still have other communities who, we have LGBT homeless youth. They make, I think, almost 60% of homeless youth in the community. We don't have equality. So we need to talk. We need to move forward. We need to include everyone.
Okay, Shahmir, quickly. 20 seconds.
20? So I know that most people here are white, and I know there's this sort of sense of feeling that you get when it's like, oh, ooh, what are they talking about? And that sort of feeling, there's an academic term. It's called white guilt. And you need to go home and really educate yourself on what privilege, your identity means, and actually educate yourself on racism. It's just sitting here and listening to us isn't going to do anything. If you're not holding the institutions that perpetuate racism, like this government, like any establishment, if you're not actually going home and addressing that, then you're not doing your job within the LGBT community. Racism is your problem, not ours. So you need to actually do the work.
Right, quickly, we've got like 15, 20 seconds each.
Okay, mine's very easy. It's know your worth, understand you've had an incredible journey, and share your story. If you feel like you've got something to say, then don't sit back, share it. Ideally with the BBC.
Munroe?
I would like to echo Shahmir and just like speak about how there needs to be an initiative to learn. And yes, listen to us, but also go off on your own back in your own time and try to find out stuff that you didn't necessarily know already. But also, I want to see more institutions like the BBC, and I believe that everybody is getting better. Employ really outstanding, controversial as well, but forthcoming people who are speaking about race and want to push forward the conversation.
Reece, quickly.
Be more aware of yourself and don't settle that you know everything, because there's still a lot to learn.
Amazing. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to our panel. Feel the love in the room. Right, we've got to go. We're late.